Welcome, friends and fiends of the pod. I'm your host, film critic and comedian Nate Wyckoff, reminding you to like, subscribe, and go to cultandclassicfilms.com, where you can purchase exclusive cult ultra-low-budget films from us. And you can also subscribe and have them delivered monthly at a big discount to your door every month. So don't miss out on that. And unlike Rowdy Piper here in They Live, you don't need special glasses to see these deals. All right, so please, thank you, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to Cult and Classic.
All right, welcome, fiends and friends, to another episode of Cult and Classic. With you, as always, is your host, Nate Wyckoff, film reviewer for horrornews.net and stand-up comic. With me today, I have my good friend, Jeffrey Tucker. How you doing, Jeff?
What up? I swear I'm not an alien set on world domination. I swear.
Well, hopefully you're not a building fire either. Along with Jeff and I, we have Mandy. How are you doing, Mandy?
I'm great today. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is a good one. This is actually one of my favorite movies, and a movie that I hadn't seen before that was recommended, so we watched these. The theme for this week's episode is aliens in the apartment. And there's some other things. There's actually a lot that is similar. I'm always surprised when we do these episodes how similar the movies are when it just looks like the theme is the same, and it's pretty crazy. So first up, we have Critters 3. That is, I believe, 3 of 5 currently, although there's a TV series and some other stuff happening. And then we have the 80s film, which I'd actually never heard of, but it seems like either people have heard of Critters 3 or they've heard of this film, Batteries Not Included, but they haven't heard of both. And so I assumed Critters 3 was the more mainstream one since it was in theaters. But Batteries, I mean, Steven Spielberg produced Batteries Not Included. And technically the film title is Asterisk Batteries Not Included, which is, I'm sure in this day and age, they would never allow that. That's craziness. It would be hashtag Batteries Not Included.
I was definitely on the opposite end of that spectrum because I remember watching Asterisk Batteries Not Included many times as a child, but never Critters 3 or Critters 1 or Gremlins or any of them.
All right, so we're going to start with Critters 3. I actually love this film, but we'll talk about it. The plot for this movie is, if you don't know, critters, or krites as they're called, are little alien fur balls with really nasty faces and like lots of teeth, and they roll like Sonic the Hedgehog, and they also can shoot quills that have like a sedative in them. And they're in the first 2 films, they're hunted by alien bounty hunters that are trying to catch them. They're like criminalized creatures that breed really quickly, and I don't even know if they breed. They just have eggs and multiply, and they eat everything. So this is the 3rd installation, and there's only one returning character from the other films, and then a little add-on after the credits or mid-credits. But the big draw for this film, for people looking back, is that it's the feature film debut of Leonardo DiCaprio. And I gotta say, I don't remember how old he is at this time. We figured out. He steps into the game a pretty good kid actor. I mean, there's no. I thought he did very well in this movie.
Yeah,
and it was nice. So I know what I think of this movie because I've seen it many times. Jeff, what's your take?
I mean, it was a cute little film. I mean, if you're looking for something for a younger audience that's kind of in that horror genre, I think this is the thing that fits kind of that type of bill. It's cute. None of our favorite characters ever really get super super close to danger. It's kind of like that kind of Goonies scare type thing. The thing that surprised me about this movie is the very unlikable characters were dealt with very rapidly. Right. They did not stick around. There was no kind of brewing of the comeuppance. It was just, this is a very unlikable character, and goodbye. All of our favorite characters make it to the end, so it really does fit that kind of young, kind of young audience feel. And they're adorable. They're awesome. They're little bitey creatures, but they're adorable.
The Troita brothers, there's 3 brothers, special effects designers who made the critters, and they're involved in this one and the other 2 previous films as well. And I I love it. I love it. We'll get into my obsession with critters. Mandy, how about you?
Oh man, so this was like 100% not my jam as a kid. And it pretty much still is not, but I do definitely like appreciate the wacky hijinks of like the menacing critter characters, their individual personalities as like puppets, and to differentiate them from each other. It's not just like a whole army of like the same monster coming at you. Like they definitely have some separation in personality there, which was kind of cool to watch. But yeah, it was I was just like, oh, they weren't even on my radar. I guess as a kid, or I knew that I might be too scared of them. It was super serious. I was basically 30 years old since I was like 5, so it was just like it was just not my jam. I was super happy to watch this and experience it and stuff. So hopefully I can bring some perspective from like a new set of eyes through the conversation.
Awesome. And I have to say, for anyone who's not interested or who isn't not interested, I don't know why you're listening, man. If you're not, if you've not seen the previous Critters, the 2 films, it's not necessary, I don't think, but because there is a little recap at the beginning that's also sort of unnecessary. But
it's like a weird like montage, like
yeah,
recap.
It's one of those 80s montages,
like previously seen on Critters.
It felt like that was one of my WTF moments of the movie that I put down, was just like, did they just insert like the preview for the prior movies?
They did. And what's funny about it is normally when you do that, I've seen this in tons of 80s movies, and although this movie came out in 1991, it definitely has the 80s feel with a little bit of the early 90s Saved by the Bell vibe, but probably with the fashion. But like the clips that they showed in that beginning segment to sort of recap, they're completely nonsensical and out of sequence. Like there's no way I feel like they could tell you anything about the movies whatsoever, except what the fuck did I just watch? Do I need to go back and watch the other 2? And then the movie itself really has nothing to do with the previous 2 movies, except for the fact that these are critters that they're dealing with. I also think you mentioned Gremlins. Critters is always kind of treated as the knockoff of Gremlins. And I mean, it is, but it's, personally, I enjoyed it more because they both have, like you said, that sort of, and Jeff, you said this too, they're kind of a safe, almost kid-friendly horror film. Critters is a little less so. The second one, in fact, despite being, I think, rated PG-13, has like a topless scene and things like that. But I mean, it's one of those, it's 80s topless. So it's sort of not, I don't know. It's just not a horrible, terrifying thing. They're kind of cute, they're kind of funny, they joke. Like the difference is that Gremlins, when they grow up, like, you know, they're cute when they're Gizmo, and then when they eat after midnight, they turn into these ugly, you know, tall lizardish creatures. They're bad tempered. Critters are always bad tempered, and they're both. They're cute, but then they have these really ugly faces, and I'm obsessed with them, I think, because they look a lot like my cat. Like she has those same Godzilla eyes, you know, that are kind of ominous, and she usually has her mouth open with all her teeth showing. So I find them super adorable, and I do like, you said this, Mandy, as well. They did a good job of making them all differentiated. Again, this is like Gremlins. Gremlins does the same thing, but they each end up having just a smidge of personality in addition to the different design, you know, the different facial markings and things like that, and you kind of look for them by the end when they're dying or getting exploded on fire, whatever. You're sort of looking like, wait, where's the one with the markings, or the one with the bleach damage, you know, like so I thought that was kind of fun. And I also think something that steps this up from a lot of the other knockoff Gremlins movies, because there are so many. I mean, the worst probably, I mean, I don't even know if the worst. The most well-known bad example would be Hobgoblins, which Mystery Science Theater did at one point, which is truly a travesty. And they kickstarted a sequel that came out a few years ago too, which, God bless Kickstarter. But yeah, it's sort of, they did a good job of doing the animatronics, the puppetry, and even when like the puppets are flying through the air, like there's a kind of goofy scene where the young female lead chucks like this barrel of something, or it's an umbrella stand down the stairs, and they get bowled over a la Donkey Kong, and they all fly through the air, kind of slow motion. They actually look like they're creatures flying through the air rather than just puppets thrown to the ground, which is usually what happens in the cheap movies, you know. So
I appreciated the mop cam as well.
The mop cam. Yes, there was some good. I liked the cinematography. The director for this is Kristine Peterson, so that's interesting. That assuming that's the real name, because Kristine hasn't done anything since I think '97 or so. Assuming that's the real name, then it's a woman, which is a nice touch. And I kind of believe it, because no female characters are heavily sexualized in this film, which would be very. I mean, if it was Michael Bay, you know, the 14-year-old girl would, you know, have like a 2 sizes too small training bra, and it would just be a disaster. And that's what I think about Michael Bay. But yeah, it's not there. And also interesting to note is it certainly could be, because Kristine Peterson has done some risque projects. The last film that she did was a grunge girl band movie with kind of a sexy lesbian twist called Slaves to the Underground in '97. Again, I don't even think, though, it's really designed for the male gaze as much as it would be if it were a male director, which makes me think that probably it is, in fact, a woman. The only reason I question it at all is because a lot of times when you can't find there's only a small segment of years where people direct from the 90s and the 80s. Oftentimes they're using a pseudonym, and it just hasn't really been released to IMDb or something like that. So who knows? But the story, like you said, both of you, it is kind of light. But there's also, I feel like it's a little bit more horror-ish, which is why Critters probably has a stronger flow in the horror community than, say, a Gremlins does in this respect, although they love that too. It's got more blood, and it's got, you know, characters do die and get eaten. You know, like Gremlins, you just assume a couple of characters die. You don't really know they die, but yeah, they die.
Well, I mean, like like the first guy definitely has like a battle that perishes, but like even like the final blow or whatever is just the critter kind of rolling across the floor, and then you see like the the mouth kind of coming at you. So it is a little bit implied, but he definitely did have a bloody battle with this thing beforehand.
Yes. Sure.
Which I love.
Fake out where you think he's gonna be okay, maybe for a second, and then
no. There's more of these critters.
Yes.
But like I liked it because it really it was shot in a way I was like, oh, like, you know, you and I could go in, grab like some puppets, and we could film this type of scene. Like it works, but it works and it's so simple, right? Like the scenes that you're like the wide shots are basically just, you know, like a dude holding a puppet and kind of, you know, writhing about. And then the close shots are, you know, a puppeteer just off the camera. And so it's like really, like it really is a shot really nice where they blend those two things together. And it creates like a nice flow. But it's like, it literally is just like a silly, like little, you know, furry puppet. Like it's so simple what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And,
so I enjoyed that.
The camera work, I think you're right. The camera work is good. And this series is not, it's no stranger to good horror directing too, and where you've got creative shots, and it's always had that fun vibe, which is, in the last entry, Critters 2 was directed by Mick Garris, very well-known horror director who's done 1,000 movies that we all know and love. And I think it's interesting too to note that the screenwriter is the co-scripter of the Crow film, Brandon Lee's final film, which most people, myself included, really enjoy. So he's done a lot of good stuff. He's also written a lot of horror schlock that I would call probably not the greatest stuff. And I think that's okay. That's David J. Shao. And he was one of the writers on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2006, which I thought was not so bueno. But he's also written some other things like the 97 series, The Hunger. He wrote Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, which is hilarious because that is the first feature film from, I cannot think of it, a couple of other big people that I can't think of right now. Let's see. But anyway, no stranger to bringing new talent into the game. So Critters 3 was a good vehicle for Leonardo DiCaprio, even though I think it's relatively forgotten in his history. Most people remember him on, I think, Growing Pains probably before they remember this, which was another good stint for him if anybody is interested in checking it out. So the plot for this movie is that it's super common for 80s and 90s movies. Wherever there's an apartment building that's the setting, there is an evil landlord who's trying to kick people out of their low rent, presumably rent controlled apartments, to build big shopping malls or things like that. And that is exactly what is happening in this film. The critters just happen to hatch onto the situation. So in the beginning, we have the little girl played by Amy Brooks, who is still acting and still in a fair amount of, at least she was up through 2010, has done a lot of horror films. I think this was her best, but good for her. And she was also in 95's Open Season, which is not the 3D animated film, but it's a Robert Wool vehicle. So any Arliss fans can enjoy that. I think, so the kids end up, both DiCaprio and Amy Brooks' characters end up at like a rest area where I guess everyone is ending up for some unknown reason, including DiCaprio's stepdad, who happens to be the landlord, as it is revealed. And right
coincidence.
away, he's a douche. Right away. There's no question about that. He walks up to Amy Brooks' father's character and is like, who's changing a flat tire, and is like, "Oh, life sucks, huh?" Literally smoking a cigar as he says it. It's just douchey all the way around. And then the family, Amy Brooks gets back in an argument with her dad because their mom died, and he sort of won't try and move on. He doesn't connect with her. He's just like, yeah, go do this, go do that, whatever. I don't really get his character arc really, because they don't dig into it. It seems like he's like, I want to have fun, and let's go. We've gone on this vacation because we're a family and we're gonna have fun. And then he's like, wasn't the same, was it? And she's like, it was good. And he's like, just be real. It wasn't the same. I'm like, what do you, be real? What? She's like a 14-year-old girl or something, and trying to hoist your feelings up. I thought that was a little weak, the father-daughter thing.
Yeah. I mean, in their next kind of big scene together, he's like, they're eating pasta and he's just like I am just done, with this moment or whatever. And it's just like, get out of my hair.
Yeah. And this is John Calvin.
Dad, be a responsible adult, please. Yeah. And he's like, nah, how about tomorrow?
Yeah, exactly. And this is, and like I said, this is John Calvin plays the father, it's weird because he's in the whole movie, but he's drugged. He gets shot with one of the quills pretty early on. And so you get a lot of him front loaded, and then you get like none of him for the rest of the thing. And I think that he plays the part fine. It's just not that important. You're supposed to have this revelation moment at the end where he's like, I love you, my daughter. And maybe he's going to fall in love with the, telephone line repair woman who lives in the apartment too. And all that could happen, but it's really it's unimportant.
Yeah. There's also like what was the importance of like the train company or whatever is like, that felt like a revelatory moment where he was like, I'm going to quit this company. But like, I didn't really see how that necessarily linked with like progress,
right?
For the character.
Yeah, I didn't. And it's insinuated that he's going to have a romance with Catherine Cortez's character, she plays the Marcia, the telephone repair woman that is sort of kind of goaded by Annie, the Amy Brooks character's little girl, into being like, hey, are there any jobs there? AKA maybe my dad could have, so we'll stop being a douche and stop leaving every weekend or whatever. Again, it all goes out the window as soon as the critters arrive, and I'm totally fine with that because it's not particularly strong as a family drama. It's a lot more fun when the critters just show up. And my apologies, there's actually let's see, 5 Critters films, or 6, 4, 5, 6 Critters film and a television show. And there's a supposed 3D ride coming to Vegas. I don't know if Corona has tossed that away, but it's going to be Critters 3D in Mandalay Bay, which I will literally go to Las Vegas to see. Okay, that's totally fine with me. I totally love it, and that's all good. And spoiler alert, if you've watched the first two and you remember when they gather into a ginormous building-sized ball of fur and roll through the town, demolishing and eating everything, we don't get any giant balls here. There's actually only a handful of critters in this film, but they do make consistent appearances. As soon as they arrive, I feel like we get our critters fill. I didn't feel like, wow, I got to see the monster for 2 seconds. You know, like it's not Iron Man 2 where I'm like, oh, I got to see Iron Man for a good 3 minutes. What a swinging swell deal here.
Yep.
So what did you guys think? So like you said, the bad characters are sort of killed as soon as they come into contact with the critters. And then it's sort of, I saw in some reviews, they were comparing it to Critters takes on the Towering Inferno, because then, you know, Marsha's character kills one of them early on as soon as she sees it because she has a flare because the power's gone out. So she has a flare and she shoves it in its mouth, and then it starts a fire in the basement, which prevents them from leaving at one point. And the fire element, I don't know that it was actually that important, right? Because they do actually go back down. Amy's character goes back down through the elevator
shaft.
Right, and can leave. And then good old returning character Charlie, Don Keith Opper, who's in the original 4 at least. He's like, he comes in, he's like, take me to your family, because he's of course hunting critters. And so you're kind of like, well, okay, maybe she should stay outside, like, right? Like, no,
if the building's on fire,
yeah,
like, maybe you shouldn't go in. I don't know.
I do think one really excellent thing this film does is it totally understands plot and it moves along quickly. Like that old adage, you know, like, your job as a writer is to get the main character up a tree and then throw rocks at him, right? Like that thing to make it worse and worse and worse. This film has that. Like everyone is kind of in a weird place, you know, or at least, you know, the main characters, DiCaprio's character has a shitty relationship with his stepfather. And then Amy Brooks' character has a bad relationship with her father and a dead mom, which, you know, I guess is important too, right? And that's how it starts. And then critters show, and then you've got a crappy, I forget the guy's name, Frank. He's the maintenance guy who's trying to help the stepfather drive everyone out of the apartment building. He then has like, what's the word? He gets eaten by critters. I guess that's really the only word there. Like he just shows up. He's a total douchebag. He talks like that. He gets eaten. And then,
over the top douchebag.
Over the top douchebag, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think he played the part,
which
well.
I think it's good though for like a younger audience, like that.
Sure.
That kind of like really over the top character, and it's like, you know, there's no room for, you know, any kind of subtlety or variation in your views of this person. He's not a good guy. Everybody dislikes him. You know, done. You know, it's easy for, you know, younger audiences to digest.
And by the way, he's a great actor. Jeffrey Blake, you might recognize. He's one of those character actors you recognize. He's been Emmy nominated. He's won some SAG awards. He was in Forrest Gump as Wesley. He was in Contact as Fisher. He's done video game voices. He was in the Technomancer, little RPG from a few years ago. Lots of stuff. And he really does have a presence. He walks in, he's over the top, he's in your face, like, man, hey, I'm a jerk. And then laughing at other people's misfortune. Then he gets eaten by the critters and you totally don't feel bad about it. And then as soon as that happens, critters start kind of trying to attack everyone. There's all those comical scenes where like, oh, it's going to come up and get the heavy set lady through the laundry chute, but she shuts it just in time and it goes back down, right?
Yeah, and it does like the cute like Sonic the Hedgehog thing where it goes
yeah, which by the way was a cool effect. I was kind of like, man, how did they get that spinning effect? Like, I don't know if they put it on a drill bit and sort of, you know, photoshopped or cropped it out of the shot. Like, I'm not sure how they did that, but it was a nice touch.
Could have done with a string too, maybe.
Okay, I don't know how your string skills are, but mine are certainly not that good.
Well, yeah, you just like wrap it up and then whoop, pull it out. You have to pull it really fast though.
I'm gonna question your.
I'm gonna do a recording for you.
I'm gonna question your dreidel knowledge. All right.
I mean, you could literally you could do a string, right? You just do the drill at the end of the string, right? You wrap the thing up so it's tightly wound basically wrapped with the string. Then you just run the drill. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. So there's still a drill involved. There's still a drill involved.
But it's off screen, and so it's easier to get rid of the
also,
string.
I love how we've gone into the whole re-engineering.
Right, and let's get that out of the way. Jeff and Mandy are both engineers, so this creative writing master, student is at a disadvantage.
Get wrecked.
but yeah, so you have that, and then shit starts to hit the fan, and I think it ramps up pretty quick at that point once the critters are seen by the characters that don't immediately die. Right, like the heavyset lady gets attacked. She's a great character actress as well. You've got, and then it's Dana Bellamy plays Rosalie, and then you've got everyone sort of trying to escape the critters by getting together and moving slowly up the building to try to get to the roof. You have this great. It's just, and then the fire starts, and then they can't get down because it's worse, and then all this stuff. And then two of the characters are drugged, so everyone has to drag them around, and two of the characters are elderly, and so you just have this upping of the tension. But it's never a scary movie, in my opinion. For kids, it would be scary. For adults, it's just supposed to be that Gremlins level of like entertaining mayhem.
Yeah.
And then there's actually I appreciate that they went out of their way to do things with the characters that didn't involve the critters that were still moderately entertaining. Like when Marcia, the telephone lady, she's trying to patch into a telephone line off the roof, and she ends up falling off the roof and hanging by a cable like several inches from the ground in the parking lot, and then spends the rest of the movie just trying to swing to the payphone.
I enjoyed that gag a lot.
I did too.
It was a good gag.
I did, and it actually and it worked. And she's actually upside down the whole time in all those shots, swinging. And I mean, I kept thinking that I would get tired of it, but they didn't push it to that point.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that. I thought that was a fun,
I enjoyed the drama of her struggle, you know, and like there's like she didn't have enough hands, like she couldn't hold like the telephone machine, pick up the thing and dial. Like she just didn't have like enough hands, and it really created this cute like physical comedy bit.
And spoiler alert,
a fantastic moment where like the recorded voice tells her she needs to put a quarter in.
Yeah, she's like, "Oh, I need a fourth hand."
And spoiler alert, she never gets to the phone. It's completely not how they get out, even though it's introduced early. And you're like, this is a brilliant resolution. She's a telephone person. She's getting to that phone line. Oh, nope, she doesn't. But she's close to a payphone. Oh, nope, never happens. In fact, at the end, she just has to be let down once everyone is out and all the critters are dead.
So good.
Yeah. So that made me happy. There's this.
Wait. I want to just before we move on. My favorite part of the movie. So that was my second favorite. My favorite part of the movie was they were like talking about like getting a gun. Like, do you have like a gun? And the guy was like, "Oh, I have a gun. Oh, but I don't have like any powder or bullets or whatever."
Right.
And then like what about a knife? Like a sharp knife? And the elderly lady in the apartment like, you know, slides into frame, like wielding this massive cleaver, like she's been like waiting her entire life to be like called into action with this meat cleaver.
Yeah, this like Silent Hill-esque like massive cleaver. Yeah, it's totally.
I loved it.
Yeah, that was a good one, and people will recognize her as the grandma in Happy Gilmore. It's Frances Bay, and she's been acting for approximately 3 million years, and she passed away in 2011 at 92. So she's been in a lot of films, and she's great. And her husband, who is the alien, who ends up being the one that kind of caused the rescue because he made a call to Don Keith Opper's character Charlie, who is the one that knows about the critters before everything went down. He's played by Bill Zuckert, who has also been in 30 gajillion things. Both very good, mature actors. Corinne, my wife, recognized him right away as Mr. Finkel from Ace Ventura. So that's probably his most well-known role. But yeah, so there's some great stuff. some great character actors in this film that I think elevate some of the elements. I'm going to play a clip. This is probably what I think is the weakest moment in the movie. Is this scene right here? This is Leonardo DiCaprio's character talking to Amy Brooks' character. The two kids. His stepdad has been eaten, and her mom is of course dead before the film starts.
We came here to evict you. I didn't want to come. Pretty awful, huh? Yeah. I just can't believe he's dead. Josh, my mom died. Not like your dad. She died. And I bet you didn't wish for your mom to die.
Josh, you don't know that. You don't know that. Her mom could have been terrible and she could have wished for it every day. Doubtful, but you don't know that. But that scene, it just felt forced. I mean, because especially there's no real, like, his dad is a jackass. Although I did like the touch that his stepdad is strict and a jerk and obviously trying to sucker these people out of their homes, in which he's been paid, he has to pay money for relocation, and he's trying to get them to leave on their own so he doesn't have to do that. And even though that, he's like, he actively wants to teach DiCaprio's character, his stepson, these things so he can take over the business essentially. And which is a weird thing because it's actually kind of sweet. Like, I'm a slumlord and I want you to succeed as a slumlord. Like it was this weird thing, you know, and so I thought that was an interesting way, I think, of trying to make him a person instead of just a villain. But we still don't really care when he gets eaten because he is a jackass. He also does things that don't make sense. Like they have him walking through the building when they break in before they find the critters, and the critters eat his stepdad, where he's like, you have to make a move on their own. And then like, he's like, hey, it's your landlord. I'm here to evict you. He's shouting into the hallways. I'm like, hey, that doesn't work. You can't evict them and not pay them. They have to leave. Like that didn't, I don't know if maybe if during directing time, they're like, this scene is boring. I need him to say something to, you know, so I don't know what the deal with that was, but that was
written in the last second.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, just had him, he was just tired. It was the 34th shot of this stupid scene where they film him from the top of a staircase and he's like, I'm the landlord. I'm here to evict you. Get the hell out. Yeah. I don't know if that was the case or not, but this scene where DiCaprio's sort of like, my stepdad, like I wished him dead. Well, he did like shut him in the room with the critters, so I can understand the guilt.
He was moderately, but I mean, here's the thing though, like that moment felt forced. Like, I agree, like that, the kind of the end of that little story arc that they were doing felt forced, but I thought it felt forced right off the beginning. It was like, I hope you're dead, and he like shuts the door, and the door's locked. It just was like, this whole premise is just, it's like, it was like, oh, I know that this conversation is going to happen later because of this moment. It was like, that was the whole reason that happened, was so he's like, you know, would have the guilt later. It just was like,
well, and the whole thing,
I'll leave it.
They were adequately awkward teenagers.
True. Like that's the thing. Their play together was actually quite good. Like when they meet in the parking lot in the beginning, like, and I love too how basically the way they meet is Amy Brooks' character has a little brother who is actually played by twins, who've been in good jillions of things, including Kindergarten Cop with Arnold Schwarzenegger. But it's sort of like Christian Cousins is one of the brothers, the Cousins twins. I sort of like how in the beginning they meet because Amy Brooks and her brother are playing Frisbee, and the Frisbee goes into the, like, over the parking lot into the woods at this rest area, and the little kid goes to get it, and DiCaprio's character shows up and grabs him by the wrist and is like, hey kid, get out of there, you could get hurt. And he kind of yells at him, and she comes like, don't yell at my brother. And then they look at each other for a minute, and then the little brother picks up the Frisbee and goes, let's play, and runs away, because that's totally how kids would be. Like, the little kid just got scolded. The little kid gets scolded every day. Like, he's not thinking this big mean man. He's thinking, hey, this kid is a kid. Let's go. Let's play this thing. And then they're like, all right, well, let's go play catch. And from that point on, like, they're kind of in a good relationship. And it was a nice realistic touch, I felt, that also sort of instantly set up that differentiation between the adults and the kids. Like, the kids have their shit together more, as we see, and the adults are the ones that have to sort of piece it together. And so that was a nice moment, and that was really strong. But again, this scene where they're talking about their dead parents, like when Amy Brooks' character comes in, my mom died. You're like, so what? Like, how does this relate at this moment? I know you're supposed to have a connection, but it's probably not going to be this one. Yeah, especially since we don't know, his original dad could have died too. We don't know that.
Yeah. Well, I just want to back to the one final point on like the awkwardness of that first scene where this whole thing kind of set off, is those two events were just too close. That's why it felt forced. Is if he was like in the car and said, I wish you were dead, like they were having an argument, it's like, I wish you were dead, and then later on this other thing happened, then you have something compelling, because putting those two events, I wish you were dead and then father getting eaten, they have to be apart. Like, you can't have them put together like that, because then it becomes obvious that you're gonna close that loop later, and it's obvious that they were like, that was like the purpose of the script, and you know that, you know, it's like you just know that it's going to happen. It could have been done way more deftly in my mind.
Well, and I think they didn't have to make him that upset about it. Like, he could be like, it's weird, like he was a real jerk to me and my mom, but like I didn't want him to die. Like, that could be the thing. And instead he seems genuinely like sick about it, which, I mean, I'm not saying that's not realistic, maybe, but what I'm saying is that it doesn't make sense with what we've seen, because the mom at the end, she's like, my husband, she goes to all the survivors like, my husband owes you a lot of money. My son told me about all this. And you're like, and she's not even like upset at all. I'm assuming because they don't really want it to be a sad ending. But like, her husband just got eaten by fur balls, like literally eaten. Like, his corpse is missing an abdomen upstairs. And she's totally fine. Everything's fine. So it would have made sense if he was a jerk all around, and then DiCaprio's character would have been just like, yeah, but you loved your mom. I didn't want him to die. Like, that would have made more sense and could have been clearer. Plus, the way the scene is shot, it's actually beautiful, but it's forced, because we're actually looking at DiCaprio's character through like two slats in the wall, and he turns around when he's talking to her towards the slats and leans against the slats in like a very stage sort of theatrical way, which didn't, I mean, as Jeff, you said, there's some great shots and great ideas and great camera work in this movie, but in this case, it was more than the job required, and so it stood out a little bit, and I think it forced some weird delivery, or stilted delivery. We've talked a little bit about Charlie's character, played by Don Keith Opper, who sort of owns the Critters movies, by virtue of that's every Critters fan knows him, because he's the one that starts from episode 1. He sees the critter ship land in the very first one all the way through Critters 4. And let's listen to this. In the beginning, he's the one that tells the kids there's bad stuff out there. They just want to eat when they're at the rest area. And he also has a comic entry, like a super ridiculous entry. Like, they go to get a Frisbee that has landed again in the woods, and they're all there, all the kids. And then Charlie's character launches out of like a debris-strewn foxhole into the air with smoke. I don't know how he was going to catch critters that way. I'm not sure if he was planning on landing on them, but it was redonkulous. And this is, but then you get some good dialogue in, and this is one of his little bits when he's talking to DiCaprio's character, who is being his signature jackass.
You think this is some kind of joke? You think this is some kind of game? You know, all they do is eat. You got to keep a weather eye out all the time. You don't watch every minute. And wait! Then it's too late.
Yeah. So he actually, I think he's a fantastic actor. He plays this character that, as through the series, becomes progressively more goofy. Like he's basically the town dork who just rides his bike and drinks. And then he meets these Ugg, who is this intergalactic bounty hunter looking for the critters, and sort of becomes his apprentice. And they have this great friendship between them, which held the first two movies together. And then in this one, he shows up there in the beginning to give the exposition, and then at the end to sort of save the day. And he's done a lot of bit parts, and so he's very recognizable. He has a gap tooth, and sort of he plays a lot of those, you know, the yokel character. But he does a good job. And this film sort of marks the end of his successful run in this series, because in the next film, which we actually get a very long setup / teaser for in the credits for this one, they make a big 180. It takes place in space, and they make a big 180 on a character from the first two that people did not like. And it sort of really damaged that whole friendship thing. And it was funny to me that a film, if you were to describe, it's about, you know, little alien fur babies that roll around and eat things, that it would sort of, the success of the series would hinge on this strange friendship between an alien and a dork. And this is the last one where we actually got to keep those characters intact, even though Ugg is not really in this film. He's in one little piece. And so I think fans remember this one fondly before the next one sort of blew that up.
I was about to say, like, this movie made me want to see the other like the two previous and the next film.
Yep.
Just, you know, not like, this isn't my genre. Like, I don't get that excited about this type of film. I'm not gonna grow a love for critters, but I do like. I'm interested in seeing more of it.
Well, I think what you're pointing at is I found this movie fun.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, it's not heavy, you know. Like you said, the people that I love don't die. And even if they did die, it probably wouldn't be done in such a way to make me bawl my eyes out. It's sort of this is goofy, and the villains are likable. They laugh all the time. They have a very Gremlins-esque scene, which they usually have in these movies, where all the critters, except for like one who's terrorizing the group, are in the kitchen of one of the apartments. And you know, it's so dorky. One eats a huge thing of chili and has gas. Another one
like gas, fast gas.
Yeah. It's like, hey, they got to metabolize fast, man. They lay eggs like nobody's business, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Right. And then there's like the dish soap bubbles, which I absolutely loved. That was so good.
Which then tied back to my favorite part of the cleaver, because that's how you do that. That one was the one that got the cleaver business, because then bubbles started like floating out of it
everywhere.
It was, and you know, and then flour thrown everywhere, and then the fact that they're all happy. That's, I think, the biggest thing about critters that was successful in the design. They can't grimace. They're all mouth, so they are always smiling, and they are always. Let's listen to this one. This is from the beginning. They've just killed their first victim in this movie, which was Frank, the dirty maintenance guy, and the evil stepfather calls him up to try and see where he's at with getting everyone to move on their own accord. And this is what happens. He calls on the phone, and of course the guy's dead.
Frank? I know you're there, Frank. I can hear you breathing. Talk to me, Frank. Frank? Frank, hello? All right, Mongo, very funny. Enough is enough. Frank, we are not amused. Frank, try to guess just how close your termination is. Okay, it's your funeral, wise ass. I'm coming over there and taking care of things myself.
Yeah. So, and of course, at the end, the critter is eating the phone. So it's like, and they do this other thing too. Like, you heard all the little gurgles and grumbles, which is how they speak. But one thing I liked that they did over Gremlin is they're like, screw it. They're not just going to make sounds. they're speaking a language to each other, which they decide to subtitle occasionally for the choice of a
Uh-oh.
joke or a pun.
I really enjoyed that as well.
And there's a great scene. It's used to the best effect, I think, in Critters 2. So that's worth a watch just to see the best subtitle joke of Critters alien speak. And the voice we heard there is William Dennis Hunt, another well-known actor. Interestingly enough, his most well-known films are in the Flash Gordon films, which are the skin flicks modeled around Flash Gordon, which are quite fun and bizarre. He's in both of them. So, but he's been in a lot of stuff. I think he did an episode of Alias and Frasier and Sabrina the Teenage Witch with Melissa Joan Hart. He's been all over the place. And you can tell because he's got that great voice. So I think ultimately what it comes down to with this movie is it's not heavy. It's got a little bit of gore, some great monster effects, and a strong cast delivering a serviceable script that doesn't surprise you in any way necessarily, except with maybe a couple of little twists, like the lady falling and trying to hang from the building while swinging towards a payphone. Like I didn't expect that, but it's not shocking. The end isn't shocking. The effects are pretty good. The sets are pretty good. And then you get a nice setup for the fourth movie if you're interested in that. So I think that's really all there is to it. It's not a complicated movie, but I do think, especially for being the third in a series, I think a lot of people probably passed this over in the rental aisles in the 90s and didn't give it a chance when they probably would have really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So it's time for our closing thoughts. Critters 3, they are, the tagline, which is continuing from the other films, is "You are what they eat." That is the Critters tagline. Mandy, what is your take on this film as to who you would recommend watch it?
Oh, wow. I guess from my own perspective, if you've not watched these types of movies before and now you'd like to revisit a piece of your youth that you never lived, I guess you can revisit it then. If you would like to have the experience for the first time of being a teenager in the 90s, watch this movie. It's quite pleasant and funny. Hijinks and all. It's all good.
Excellent. Jeff, who would you recommend this movie to?
I'd say, like, if I were just, like, pick one person, it'd be, like, a starter horror film for, like, you know, I don't know what age group. You pick the number. You're the parent. But, you know, I mean, if you want to introduce your kid to, like, kind of the horror genre, this is, I think, a nice, light way to do so. You know, it's not, like, scary. There's not a lot of gore. It's you know, if your kid gets into this and really likes it, maybe, you know, you can, you know, escalate or whatever. But you know, if they're totally, like, traumatized by this, don't show them The Exorcist or, you know, or these other films.
Right.
Probably not going to go over well. This movie probably won't traumatize them. But yeah, I guess that'd be the target. It's also just fun. Like, if you're an adult and you want to go back and just experience some kind of kooky 80s stuff.
I agree. I think, and I would add to that, first, everyone's sort of pick up on this, that it sort of feels like a family movie, like a kid's movie in some ways. Shudder, the streaming horror channel, actually, I believe, has the rights to this currently, and they've produced a couple of I think the last two movies that have been direct to video. And actually, they have a Critters TV series, and it is their kids show, and it's sort of like, you know, like Stranger Things light, if you can call it that, but with critters. So I think they hit the nail on the head, and I think Critters 3, with the two, you know, leads being Leonardo DiCaprio and Amy Brooks, young characters, I think that's probably where this really started. That idea that, oh, this would appeal to these kids. And also, Patton Oswalt said this one time in a bit. He talked about how he thought his daughter would be scared when she actually saw part of the Benicio del Toro werewolf reboot. And later on, she's like laughing. He's like, "What's funny, sweetheart?" And she's like, "Doggy wearing a shirt." You know what I mean? Like, I think kids will find the critters kind of cute. They're scary, but they're cute, and they're also kind of funny. So even when they eat people, you're kind of like, meh. Like, it's people would have one as a pet. Some exotic idiot would have it on a pet, and they would make, you know, Tiger King 2, the Critters era. You know.
Yeah.
So I think those are all good recommendations. And I would recommend this just for horror buffs who haven't seen the Critters movies or who haven't seen them in a while. Watch the original 3, and then you'll love it, and you'll watch 4 and you'll be disappointed. But you're still going to watch 4 because you have to finish that original series. So, and even if you don't like 4, Brad Dourif's in it. Okay, Brad Dourif's in it.
I was about to say I looked it up. Yeah,
he's in it. He's fantastic. I will see anything he's in.
And we need more movies with him so we can put the hashtag Brad Dourif so that he comes and likes our.
I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna Tupac and I'm gonna get it tattooed on my chest. Dourif for life. All right, so that is Critters 3. Enjoyable film. This next one, which I think of all 3 of us, I think Mandy, you were the only one that had seen this before.
I may have seen it. If she was watching it all the time, I feel like I had to have been in the room at one point.
I feel like
I have some pretty clear memories of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff must have seen it, but he's just probably too young to really remember.
I don't recall it, to be honest.
It seems kind of like, just from looking at reviews and what other people thought at the time, it feels like this is the kind of movie that maybe instead of Hoosiers or something, they showed on in classrooms a lot. Like when it's movie day, like these next 2 days, we'll watch, Batteries Not Included. I don't know if that's true or not.
No, we definitely had a bootleg copy of this from the video store.
We don't want the FBI knocking on our door. Jeez.
Right?
The corpse of whoever owned Video Update is going to roll out of their grave.
Like, what? You know how much revenue we lost because you kids were watching the same
$450
at home? Yeah.
I think this is a movie that when I was halfway through it, I was like, how could I have not known about this movie? Because it has all the earmarks of or all the hallmarks of a beloved family movie from the 80s, and it is produced by Steven Spielberg, so it has some financial clout behind it, and the effects for the time are actually quite good. So a lot of them I felt still hold up because it's all practical effects. Some of the green screening has the same problems with a lot of green screening, which is the color, which really means the lighting is off a little bit. It's the only thing that really separates it. But again, we mentioned Mick Garris having directed Critters 2, and he actually crafted the story for Batteries Not Included. He didn't write the screenplay, but he crafted the stories. There were 4 writers: S.S. Wilson, Brent Maddock, Matthew Robbins, and then Brett Bird actually co-wrote this, who is people may recognize as one of the head writers and creators at Pixar. He wrote The Incredibles, Ratatouille, Incredibles 2. He also wrote The Iron Giant. So there's a reason why this film has a really great story at its heart and really well-developed characters. The plot, just to get it out there, if you have not seen this movie or if you haven't seen it in many moons, is that there's an apartment building that is going to be torn down by an evil landlord. In this case, he is actually trying to pay them money to leave, but nobody wants to leave because they've been there forever or it's the perfect place for them or whatever, even though it's basically a construction war zone around them. Everything is completely gone. And the evil landlord has it's not the handyman this time around. It's just a sort of a goon in 80s terminology.
The knock knock crew.
The knock knock crew. That's right. He is headed by Michael Carmine, who is a fantastic actor. I thought it was interesting that they chose to have. I think Carmine is maybe Puerto Rican. I'm not sure. I could certainly look that up, but he's one of the only ethnic people in the primary cast. The other being Elizabeth Pena, who's also a fantastic actress, and of course Frank McRae plays Harry, the large black fix-it guy who is like the giant sweetheart ex-boxer of the group. So there is a multi-ethnic cast, but I thought it was interesting that we had, if it wasn't for Elizabeth Pena, I was wondering how this film would feel in today's age, having the primary bad guy through the movie be someone who isn't white. And it's interesting. I wish we actually we get a lot of people's stories. And we start to get his story a little bit. Like, he's like, I didn't know my dad, right? Like, that's one of the things he said, one of the few things he says about himself. And you get this really cool dynamic that starts to build between him and Jessica Tandy's character, who, of course, at her advanced age plays Faye Riley, who is the beloved resident of the complex, who is... we don't know if it's it's dementia.
It is dementia. They don't specifically say it's Alzheimer's, but it is she is going through
dementia. But there is definitely some weird component they tried to do where she's also seems to be consciously trying to hide the fact that her son has died, and so she continually calls Carmine's character Bobby, her son, and he's like, I'm not your kid, but at the same time he also kind of seems to like it. Like, even when he's really a nasty character, he never is really particularly mean to her.
He's actually fairly sweet to her.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And so basically the film opens...
They're sweet to each other, actually. I think.
Yeah, even though everyone else, of course, hates him because he's trying to push them out of their home and he breaks their stuff and he's just a mean guy.
Yeah.
And of course, we need to mention that Jessica Tandy's character's husband, who I would say is probably the lead if you had to pick one. There's several leads in this film, but he plays Frank Riley, and they're an old couple who owns the restaurant in the bottom of this building, or rather rents the restaurant, the only restaurant in this building, which Michael Carmine's character destroys in the beginning. And right before he destroys it, he goes in to try and pay them all off. And some of the residents are there, and the people you hear talking is the restaurant runner, Frank Riley, Jessica Tandy's character, Faye Riley, his wife who has dementia, and Michael Carmine. So here we go.
Bobby!
Stop calling me that.
Get out of here. And you, stay away from my wife and stay away from this building. You tell Lacey his money stinks, you understand?
You kill my head, man. Money's not a good reason to move, okay? Here's a good reason. That's right, abuela.
And the reason he says that's right, abuela, which, if anybody doesn't know Spanish, that means grandmother, is he's like, if you need another reason, and he smashes the tabletop next to them with the plates on it with a baseball bat. And then they're all looking, and she smiles and smashes the teacup that's in her hand. And because she's not all there, right, is the implication. And I liked that scene because it was funny, but there's so much emotion packed into this opening. Like, as Carmine's character goes through apartment to apartment trying to give these people money who don't want it, and sort of abusing them as he does it to try and encourage them to leave. It's actually uncomfortable, right? Like, I mean, it's unlike Critters, where I feel like, you could say, as you did, Jeff, both of these movies are not really heavy. Like, there was it's not Shadowlands. I was not, sobbing on the floor, a wreck of a man. But this one has a lot of backstory for every character, and it's all kind of sad for a lot of it. And the idea is then that these aliens, these mechanical robotic aliens, come down and take residence in this hotel building, and they fix things as they go through their process, right? That's the plot of this, is this group of people is essentially saved. Their home is saved and their lives are sort of improved by the presence of these robotic space aliens that are like little flying saucers that actually give birth to several baby robots that become kind of a part of the whole group. So that's the overall plot of this. It's very similar in the setup to Critters 3. There's the bad landlord, the people don't want to move, and there's a bunch of people who are trying to stop it. The characters are the same, but
the fire.
They both have a fire. That's right. In this case, it's arson, right?
Right.
I just, before I forget, Michael Carmine's actually in a movie I absolutely love, which is a really bizarre action film called Band of the Hand from 1986. It's by Paul Michael Glazer's the director. Definitely check it out to see Carmine do some great stuff, even though he tends to be cast as sort of the stereotypical, he's the token Hispanic guy who speaks with a Brooklyn Hispanic accent. But he does a really great job, and he totally deserves a heap of credit, especially for this film, because I think his character showed a lot of range that's subtle rather than over the top. But anyway,
wait, when did you say that was? Because I thought he passed away in like the late 80s.
89, right? Yeah, it was 3 years before he died.
Yeah.
And which is sad because he was actually quite prolific. He was up all the way until the end of his life. He was in Leviathan as well, which is a great Aliens knockoff that takes place underwater. If anyone is interested, and how could you not be interested, especially since it stars Peter Weller, who is the one true RoboCop. Okay, so back to the point. Batteries not included. Mandy, what did you think about this movie? I know you've seen it many times.
Yeah, so it's funny, like I only actually remembered a couple of the scenes from childhood, but being like that emo, like older person born in a young body kind of thing, like the parts that I remember, the interactions with like the artist and the pregnant woman, how she just really like felt his art. That's what I remembered. And I remembered the boxer like repairing the tile work in the entryway, and I was pretty jazzed to see those again. I really liked as an adult, like putting together more of maybe the metaphor of the movie, where there's these aliens that come in that fix physical things, but through fixing those physical things, they help to bring the characters through resolution of their emotional brokenness as well. So it was like, well, that was pretty good.
Yeah, there's a lot of emotional sort of stuff in here. And the pregnant woman you're talking about is played by Elizabeth Pena, who, weirdly enough, she also died relatively young. She died at 55 in 2014, and she was acting all the way up until she passed away, and still has posthumous movies released. I think the last one was like 2018 or something. Brad Bird brought her in as a side character. She was Mirage in The Incredibles and things like that. So now I'm wondering if this movie's cursed. Okay, we're gonna come back.
Oh no.
but
I
yeah,
also really enjoyed. Yeah, I also really enjoyed the visual of the same one that they use in Up, at the end of Up, with a small apartment building surrounded by the huge development.
Yep. Like, and again, it's Brad Bird, so it's hard to imagine that wasn't in their mind as they were doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another interesting fact about this movie, when you watch it, there's a lot of older people. Like, this movie is one where, and actually Critters too, to an extent, some of the main characters are older. In this case, the main characters are not just adults or mature, but they're elderly. And they did a great job with it. And that's partially, I would credit it with the fact that the casting director for this film is an incredibly prolific casting director who also cast other films that starred older actors and actresses like Cocoon. So, and it's Penny Perry who did the casting. And I mean, her resume is pages, and it is every single thing you could think of some genre she's done, from tiny TV movies to large scale productions like this one. She's done it. So kudos on that, because it was a really good casting job. And for those of you who think, oh, well, she probably cast lots of kids movies, she did. She also was the casting director, uncredited, for I Spit on Your Grave, the 2010 remake of that video nasty. So she's done everything. And I think she did a really good job with every single person in this movie. The other character you're talking about, because two of the characters in the apartment complex is an artist who's kind of tied, like he feels his girlfriend leaves him at the very beginning because of Carmine's character's skeezy actions towards her. He is so he's single and he's angry, and he hurls his paintings out the window. And Elizabeth Pena's character sees them, and we don't see her do it until, we don't realize she's done it necessarily until later on, but you kind of assume she goes and collects the paintings and puts them in her apartment. And it's clear that she has a crush on him. She's pregnant, and her boyfriend, the baby daddy, presumably, is a musician, a traveling musician. So she's not there. And Carmine's like, he's never coming back. And we kind of assume that. And then he actually comes back at one point. But she clearly has a crush on the artist, right? And the artist, Mason, played by Dennis, and I always I've seen his name before, and I always think I will never say this right. It's Boutsikaris, I think is how you say it. But he's also been in a lot of stuff. He's still acting, so I guess the curse isn't fully. He's been in Better Call Saul.
It wasn't until now.
Wasn't it?
Fully realized.
Right.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because now totally cursed.
Yes, exactly. Totally true. At least, hey, it's the cast. It's not us. But this is the one thing I'll say about Dennis's character in this movie. Fantastic, lush hair. Like, his hair, he has a full beard, but then his hair is like 80s perfect. This is an 87 movie, so it's just like he could have stepped onto the set of any single, like, Family Ties, Growing Pains, like any TV sitcom, and been the dad or the successful older brother, and they would have just assumed he's supposed to be on set because his hair is fantastic. He was pretty peak 80s.
The wardrobes in both of these movies were delightful. As far as like an 80s, early 90s time capsule. Like,
yes.
Think that I knew people who owned all of the clothes in these movies.
And I want to say that too. So she's loving it. He's kind of a jerk. Like, he's not a terrible person, but he's not like
he's blind. He doesn't see the things in front of him. I wouldn't say he's a jerk. He's I don't know what the word is, but he's
well, I was on her
side.
He's
not paying attention.
They get really close, right? And you assume that they're going to be a couple or very much a couple. And then he has this line. So what's happened is the aliens, one in particular, the little silver one with the blue eyes, is who we kind of take to be the female in our minds, I guess. She's been trying to suck a lot of power from other outlets. And so they have this little shack where they've been throwing stuff and collecting things from people's apartments on the roof, this old pigeon den. And so they string power up there, and she ends up powering up and giving birth, right, to 3 little critters, one of whom at first seems to be dead, which is really tragic. And as a kid, I would have been devastated, but we're going to come back to that. This is after the alien has given essentially stillbirth, and right now, Jessica Tandy's dementia character is burying it in a planter. And everyone's kind of gathered around.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leadeth me beside the still waters.
Faye, this has gone far enough. Come on, get up.
God accept it, Frank. It's over. Poor little soul.
What soul? What soul? Mrs. Riley, it's a chunk of metal. It's 9 ounces of canned goods, most of it from your apartment. Now we can really look inside.
Wait a minute. Last night you were so excited. Now they're chunks of metal?
You don't go out and bury the most advanced, self-perpetuating, machine-tooled flying clockwork known to man. Mrs. Riley, please!
You know, that little tiny, helpless, spare part, it got born and it never had a chance. It could happen to anyone. What's the matter with you?
Okay, so I feel like this is a really packed, like, this scene is packed with meaning here, right? So first we have the fact that he's being callous, right? He's not, I mean, it's dead, right? We would dissect a dead animal that we'd never seen before. Before we get into deep on this, I want to ask you guys, because I would have defended that burial site with my life, because I cannot separate emotion from tiny things. But you both are engineers. What was your take on that moment? Because he brings up this sort of like potentially scientific, high-minded idea. You can't bury it. We have to understand it.
All right. So here's the thing. One of the big themes throughout this film is miracles. And so I think they were playing on the fact that life is like a miracle. And so this little creature is, should have been, just one of the other miracles that came about. And the fact that it's not is like a really sad thing, right? And he sees it as, just an object that could be kind of, fiddled with and learned from. I think it's just 2 different viewpoints. I think that he was incorrect in very clearly these were, sentient beings with, emotions, and, it wasn't just a machine. right, at this point. But I think that's where he was coming from.
Let's ask the only one who has children on
Yes.
this podcast, Mandy. What's your take on it?
Oh, it's funny that I don't remember being emotionally crushed by that moment in the movie, but I remember like the other parts of like the humans connecting to each other. I also think like it's very ambitious and kind of egotistical of him to believe that he or anybody else can understand the alien technology that must be present in something like that.
He's a painter and not a great one, if I can say that as someone who went to art school. I'm feeling
a little, I'm feeling like a little triggered as an engineer with someone from marketing coming in and saying like, well, can't you just make it work? Like, you're the engineer.
Right.
Open it up and like everything will be
I'm
fine
doing to you
and,
right
like,
now.
you'll know what's going on.
Like I'm doing right now.
I mean,
like, hey, Mom, tell us how this happened. Yeah.
Right? So I think it was just it was pretty I don't know, arrogant even of him to just be like, well, clearly we'll just take the lid off and we'll figure out how these alien species can turn your canned goods from your apartment into a living, adorable, tiny little baby alien.
And here's the thing that's amazing about this too. Like another aspect is that when it's born and it's clearly not alive, because there's no lights. Harry, who is the big softy maintenance man, played by Frank McRae. His character, we know he used to be a boxer, but he looks like he wouldn't hurt a fly, right? He's very sweet. He doesn't stand up for himself when Carmine comes and picks a fight with him and roughs him up, kind of. He when he first sees it, the first time he ever speaks on camera, because they say he never really talks, he says batteries not included when he sees it, which, by the way, was a weird ass thing to say, because it's almost like a joke at a funeral. But because we kind of got to see his character, I didn't think it felt like that, because he seems like he's, for how we would say it in the olden times, simple, right? You don't know if he's been hit a lot or what the case might be. But he ends up stealing this thing from the dirt while they're all like, what are you doing? And lock himself up. And of course, because he gets it, right? It doesn't have power. The whole thing has been power. It's like batteries not included. And granted, it's by accident, but he does give it life. And it becomes sort of somewhat attached to him, and he's attached to it. So that's an adorable twist and side thing. But what I found really interesting in this scene, that it's not fully explored, but I do think it's very present, is the racial and socioeconomic divide. Because we look at Mason's character, the painter, when he says that, and he's got this big apartment, this big lofted apartment. And even though it's kind of a dump looking, right? It's this big lofted apartment, and he's a painter, and he doesn't even seem like he's really sold anything. It sounds like he's not that high up on the chain yet. And then we have Elizabeth Pena's character, Marissa, who's pregnant. Her boyfriend may or may not be coming back, and she's Hispanic. And living in, we only see a really cramped apartment for her. We only see one room and a kitchenette off of it. And we assume maybe there's a bedroom. Like all of his paintings only fit, they take up her entire living room, right? Yeah. So we see that. And her response to him, it's like, this thing just got born, didn't even have a chance. It could have happened to any of us. Like that was this big moment, right? Where it's like his privilege is showing hardcore. And he's asked other things too, like, you know, what do you mean? Haven't you gone to the doctor for the baby? And she's like, I can't afford the doctor. Which, by the way, what man that is a good man with white privilege would not have instantly said, well, I'll take you to the clinic? Like, that's just, that was what expected to happen in some sense. But like,
I'll take care of you. Yeah.
It was a really interesting
that hit me hard as someone who has gone through a pregnancy, and like, you do have those worries, even if you've been to the doctor, like anything could happen. Like it's one of the great mysteries that's still left to humanity, is like, there's so many things that they can do to help you understand and to really like to try and know what to expect, and like you just can't until it happens. And so like that, like I was like, oh, she's just worried about her baby like so much. Like she's so about her baby and her future that, I mean, having aliens show up is like pretty big, but also like she's just identifying so much that little alien mother.
She's feeling deep empathy, and his character is feeling zero. It's like one's at 100, one's at 0, and that's kind of why I said it's two different perspectives. It really is. He's just blind. He just can't see it.
Yeah, the right perspective and the wrong one. I'm just kidding.
Fine. You want to go that way?
We're not going to open that can of worms.
Yeah,
Is this the hill you're going to die on, Jeff? No, I was kidding. So yeah, I thought that was one of the strongest scenes. And so as it goes, it kind of plays out then how we expect it to, I think, in some ways, right? Like the aliens, the babies start helping out at the restaurant clandestinely, and we get some comedic roles in there. We have this scene in the restaurant after they're working in the kitchen when Carmine's character comes in and he kind of almost gets into a fight with one of the construction workers who's really warmed to this restaurant, and everyone's eating there, right? Like everything is going amazing all of a sudden. And like the people that are supposed to be tearing it down are patroning the restaurant and loving it. But he sits down and it looks like they're going to kick him out of the restaurant. And then Jessica Tandy's character, has been treating him kind of like a son, comes in and is like, sit down, get some food, and gives him soup. And he's like, you really want to feed me? And she's like, of course, you have to eat. And he's like, well, I'm going to go. He's like, well, you have to eat first. And he starts to really like have this kind of moment with her. And then he sees the alien or sees something that could be the alien in the background. And he's like, you're not fooling me. You're not crazy. And like, which is sort of an interesting take on him, because we see him more and more every time he shows up now, where it's like, oh, everything is against him, which sort of plays into that whole idea again, which like there are the haves and the have-nots. And it's another form of like the pregnant single mom, like he's this driftless person. His gang has left him because he told them that they had weird, crazy aliens or ghosts. I think he's spirits. They mess with him and leave him. So it's just him. He's now all alone for real. And we start to see this, and then it backslides. And it's not enough to be heartbreaking, but it did. I felt it in the feels, right? Like it hits you. And it gets just more and more so, because then we get to the big finale where the babies have fled and they basically run off, and they're trying to find him. The humans go out to find him. And Carmine, who's now been essentially fired as the tough guy for this rich, landowner, he goes to try and kick them out for the last time because that guy can do this, and the guy sent someone else to burn the place down. And so he's got this elaborate setup. It must be a real kind of setup because it's so bizarre. Like there's like chemicals. They're gonna ignite.
Yeah, he like shows up with his arson kit, like a doctor.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's
a bag of like arson materials.
Right, and they're all like home goods, so it would probably look like it. So
yeah, you don't like leave a bomb canister. You're leaving balloons, and I think his fuse was like in a like milk carton.
Yeah,
essentially,
And so it's so essentially he gets there and he's like, the place is empty or whatever, and he's like, fine, we'll do it the right way. And Carmine kind of goes crazy and he kicks like the gas line out, and he's like, what are you doing? Like, clearly you don't need to do this and it's going to look sketchy. But he's like, I don't care, I got this. I'm going to do it. And then he's essentially harassing the guy that took his job, his terrible job. And then Jessica Tandy leans out the window upstairs, and he realizes she's still in the building, and he flips out on the guy, and he's like, you got to undo it. And he starts beating the crap out of him, which is a great scene because you finally get this confirmation that he's not a monster. He may be a bad person, but he doesn't want to kill or hurt someone, right? Like there's this, at least not her, like there's some sort of softness in this person that we know has been there, but now we get to see it. And I like the fact that he's using it in a brutality form by beating the crap out of this guy who, of course, is a professional con man, essentially, right? So he's like, my leg, you broke my ankle, I can't go. And he tells him where it is. And then, of course, his ankle's not broken and he drives away, right? But Carmine's character goes in to then save Jessica Tandy. And it's this whole thing when she realizes, because he's nice to his dad when he tries to pretend to be her son, he's like, Dad's great. He's telling out in the car, like, let's go, trying to get her to leave. And she's like, you're not my son, which is a heartbreaking moment because it's when she finally confronts that her son is dead, right? Which is a weird thing. I think this is a movie magic moment because I don't think dementia is going to work like that in some way.
Yeah, that's not really the way
it makes you. It does make you wonder though, like how much is dementia and how much is just such a deep-seated denial that she's created. Like it's clearly more than that at play. But again, we get this nice we get this nice moment where he's like, screw it, you're 10 pounds, I'm going to carry you out. Like, this is how it's going to happen. I don't know what you guys thought about the fact that really he doesn't get, we kind of, at least I did, kind of as like a sappy American audience watching what feels like a sappy American film in many ways. I was really hoping, you know, you kind of expected that thing at the end where it's like they kind of adopt him and he's like working at the restaurant or something. And we don't get that. Instead, he shows up at the hospital because he has burned hands, right?
They edge towards it. They kind of give you that hope that it's going to happen.
And then it's a little more realistic than that, huh?
Yeah.
Because they kind of,
it gets taken away.
Yeah, he shows up with flowers to her room, Tandy's room, and her husband sees it and he's like, he's trying to make her feel better. And he's like, oh, I don't like this guy, but I can play this to help her. And he's like, look, Bobby's home. And she sees, and he's got flowers, and she sees him and she just starts bawling. And you know that the illusion has been broken, right? Yeah. Presumably for good, if it could work like that. And then Carmine's character, he just leaves and you just see him throwing the flowers in the trash. And we see him one more time because at the end, the aliens show up en masse in the middle of the night. Harry's the only one there with this new dog companion, which I thought was a cute trick because they're like, we can't leave him with no one. If the aliens leave, he's got his own friend. So he has a dog now. But they're sitting in the front of this demolished building and all these aliens show up and they rebuild the place from top to bottom overnight. Okay. So, and that's of course when the legalese permits expire, so they can't do anything about it now. So now it has to stay. Nice little, you know, a hand of God moment. But
there was also like the woman showed up that was in the restoration. So like now she's going to work to protect it or whatever.
And so everyone's in the crowd, basically. She's there because it looks beautiful, because her thing is like, I can't make this a historical building. It's a dump, which I'm pretty sure most historical buildings are dumps, but it's true. They don't have a lot of money. So there you go. But, and then, and Carmine's character is in the audience. So you get a little bit of hope, but I thought it was interesting that they didn't choose to go that far. Because I don't know that I would have faulted them for it, but it isn't very realistic. Like, this is probably more realistic. And it's just sad that he doesn't get that recognition that, hey, I did a nice thing. I was going to do a bad thing, but I stopped a worse thing. Which
they didn't finish his redemption. Like, he kind of had a redemption. They didn't finish the redemption, which, I mean, I think is fine. You know, maybe he didn't really deserve a full redemption.
Which is a possibility. I mean, it's true. He's kind of been a terrible person. And the other thing, so we've talked about a lot of the aspects of the movie, and I think it's actually a very sweet, heartwarming movie. There's a lot of great stop motion and animatronic effects, probably some puppetry effects, I'm sure, in here. The design of the characters is great. The casting is great. The sets are great. Everything, it looks like a Spielberg movie. And yet there is a problem, I think, which is in the pacing. And it's not, that's not fair. Not the pacing. The actual plot has so many elements and side stories and back bits and moments that it's long. This feels like a long film to me. I think it's almost 2 hours. It's not quite, but it's almost there. It's an hour and 47 or so.
It also doesn't lean enough into the cutesy little aliens, because they're really incidental to the story.
Right.
It's not really about them, even though you look at this lovely poster wherever it is over here. You know, it very much has in the frame. It's not about them. It actually is more about the building behind them. You know, the people that live there, obviously.
Like the character drama that's going on with everyone.
And we haven't, sorry, Mandy.
I actually was going to ask you a little bit about the pacing. So, like, I got to, like, 30 minutes to the end of the movie, and I'm like, whoa, how is this another 30 minutes? But then, you know, whatever. But at the beginning, the pacing and the style of acting, I don't know if it had to do with the age of the actors or a choice of the director, but it felt very, like,
a play,
theatrical.
Yes, very much like a stage.
Like I was on a stage in a theater, and that is how the roles were being played. The way you would see it live, and there's certain mannerisms and tones of voice and like pacing of the way things are spoken that kind of go with that versus going with a movie. And I was wondering, like, if you noticed that as well.
I did. In fact, the first real chunk of dialogue we get, it's a monologue by Jessica Tandy. She's going on this this speech about how things should be and how they are. And she's of course in dementia, and she's like, I had to do the shopping. Of course she doesn't have any groceries. Like it's a monologue, and there's a couple of moments, and I felt like it dropped off a little bit as it went on and became, when the aliens arrived, is a little less. But there's even the framing of the shots felt, you know, as you said, and we talked about this with some of the scenes that were really overt in Ernie Reyes Jr.'s Ultimate Fight, or The Process, which is things are staged on a linear path in front of us, and we see it that way. I was getting a Steel Magnolias vibe when I was watching it, because you know, that's a stage play that's been turned into a film, which felt very much like a stage play when it was filmed. So I did get that, and I looked to see if maybe there was some sort of stage background of the author, and I didn't necessarily find any, but that's harder to track down than film records. And so, but definitely that is absolutely what I got in the beginning.
Okay, yeah, and it was definitely a beginning thing versus like a throughout the whole movie.
Well, and they're talking at the audience, even though they're in conversations with themselves, right? They're basically saying things for our benefit. It's not necessarily exposition, but they're saying things to develop characters that they're not responding to each other. And that's a very, you know, stage play device to kind of get stuff out there.
Well, yeah, it definitely was. Like in the beginning, you have, like you said, there's a monologue, and then, you know, the Knock Knock Boys, that was almost a monologue. They weren't looking for responses. They were just roaming around, like, you know, doing their, you know, stage show. It was literally was a stage show they were doing for the people in the building. So I can see why you kind of took it that way. I can feel that.
Yeah, and so we just had a short break, and my wife criticized my handling of the talk about dementia, and I want to clarify. Absolutely, you know, I'm not an expert by any means. Have known people and family members who have dementia of various kinds, but it is one of those cases where, of course, they can forget who people are or confuse people. That seems very understandable in that situation, and that's how it felt in the beginning. My slight criticism was that for the sake of plot and resolution, they seem to imply that once she accepted that Carmine's character was not her son Bobby, then she now knows that her son is dead. And I don't think that, it seems unlikely to me that there would be some sort of long-term change in her if dementia was at the root of that problem, right? Like it just seems, and again, maybe the brain's complicated and so is dementia. So that could be the case. Or it could just be that she was still in that lucid moment when she remembered that he was gone. But I don't think that's how they wanted us to feel. I think they wanted us to feel like it was more of a change in her.
Yeah, and I think that there's also some foreshadowing to that, or like just like little breadcrumbs throughout the film between her and her husband. Even in the clip that you played where she's burying the little baby and talk about she's like, they're talking about a death, and like the way that they talk is almost like reading between the lines, like they're having a conversation about their son. Like she's saying like it's done, and like I don't know. I'm sorry.
She was on
specific, but it felt like foreshadowing, or like that there was something that was a long drawn out struggle between the two parents in acknowledging the death of their own child. That kind of sets it up for later, or sets it up that it's more than just her forgetting because of like a dementia.
I think you're right. And I think that is a really interesting moment there, because she is the one that says, it's done, just accept it, which is funny because then you sort of feel like, wait, by his not acknowledging the fact that Bobby's dead, is that helping her act as though he isn't? Right? Which is sort of a self-sacrificial martyr thing, right? Because when she talks about her son, she speaks as though it's the father's fault for the son being gone. You drove him away. You were nice. And so if he were to say like, Bobby's dead, he died in a car accident, you know, which certainly wasn't my making, you know, that could sort of end that and sort of relieve him of some guilt of that. But it's almost like he wants the guilt, right? Because he does clearly miss his son, feel bad for his wife, who, I mean, she has to have dementia, right? In addition. So I think that is an interesting subtext, and it's all there and you feel it, even if there's not a really tidy end to it. Just one more point on the dementia. I think in general, they're not treating it 100% anyway. One, that's not what the movie is, essentially. It's not, but also like she's taking some sort of liquid medicine for it. That doesn't, I mean, there is no liquid medicine for it. And if there was, it certainly wouldn't taste like whatever nice thing she says it tastes like. So we don't really we don't know what that is. That's in the beginning and it's not really addressed again. But it is an interesting thing to see. Like they didn't go so far into her state that we would be able to have a lot of problems with it. They just went far enough that makes you wonder.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she was old. Just because she was taking medicine doesn't necessarily mean it was related to the dementia diagnosis. Yeah.
Right.
For a lot of things. But yeah, I thought the way that he handled it was, very like Hollywood.
Yes.
Yeah. It was story based.
It was story based, ambiguous, right, for plot reasons. Yeah. And they left out all the inconvenient stuff that goes along with dementia, like cognitive decline. It's less pleasant. But I think that it illustrated kind of the pain and complexity of still loving that person and seeing how they lose and regain connection with their own memories, like day to day.
Yeah.
It was a good illustration, but definitely not the full truth.
Yeah, so I mean, just a little background on us. We've had dementia in our family. We lost our grandmother to Alzheimer's, and it's pretty horrific. It's definitely left a mark.
It's a hard thing.
If anybody else out there has gone through something similar, but it is a very sad and scary diagnosis, and it doesn't end quickly. It goes very, very slowly, and it's very bleak. But yeah, it really does. Some of the elements there did feel pretty honest, like the idea of not recognizing a person and calling them a different name and thinking they're a different person. I think more likely what happens is you just don't know who the person is. But I had been attributed to other, like some of my uncles maybe, or
I have two similar.
Yeah.
Not your uncles, but
yeah. So it wasn't far off to to be insulting or anything. Like it was definitely story driven, and I think it was close enough to get the right feels in there. For that type of character that is going through dementia.
Let's touch quick on the director of this film. So Matthew Robbins, I'm pretty well versed, but when I saw Matthew Robbins' name as a director of a Steven Spielberg production, I was like, I don't really know Matthew Robbins' work as far as I know. And he's actually more prolific as a writer. He directed a few things, but he worked with Spielberg on several things. He did the original story sketch for Electric Labyrinth THX 1134, the short, which inspired Lucas's later film of it. He also did additional story writing on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I assume is where he came into contact with Spielberg. But he's actually one of the main writing folks for Guillermo del Toro right now, which is awesome. He worked on Mimic, the Don't Be Afraid of the Dark 2010 remake that Guillermo del Toro did, Del Toro's 2015 Crimson Peak, and he's actually also doing the script for Del Toro's 2021, who knows, maybe Mr. Rowan will push that to 2022, but update and disturbing version of Pinocchio, which I'm very excited for. So very prolific, very excellent writer, making this not directorial debut. It's actually right in the middle of his directing career. But I think that it sort of probably explains why so much attention is paid to the story over some of the other elements. Even though it's beautiful to look at, it is a long one, and there's a lot more character work in here than might actually be necessary for the film.
So I have a few theories as to why this didn't kind of knock it out of the park with audiences, and isn't like today as like this beloved film from this time period.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple things. One, I'm actually really glad I didn't speak first, because my sister mentioned Up, and literally the beginning of this film is the exact same as the beginning of Up. Up did it, masterfully. This was, kind of, the seed idea, really, where you basically, the film opens up with what is essentially like an old-timey slideshow of photos of Frank and Faye, meeting and, getting married and having a kid, and basically opening this cafe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In Up, you have the meeting of two characters. They meet in this house and they refurbish this house, and they go through their life of trials and tribulations, and then it gets to the end. In both cases, the point is you feel sentimental about the building. And this is really important for the plot of the plot of both films. If you don't care about either of these buildings and don't think that they have some sort of sentimental value, the whole film doesn't work, because in both cases you're just like, just leave. Old folk, just move out, go someplace else, right? It's just a building, move on. But by bringing that kind of like that little kind of sentimental element to the building, like it has a history, it has a story with it, you get a little bit of that kind of sentiment. And in Up, that's like all you needed.
It's a character all by itself.
Exactly. It becomes like a character that you love, like another one of the characters. And if you look at the poster, it shows it like as a character almost, right? Like it's this big imposing thing. It's half of the screen. I think Up did it better. I think at the end of the little short silent film in Up, like you're bawling your eyeballs out, and like you love the character, and you're like, please let this house survive. Like, get out of here, developers. In this case, it was a little brisk. It was, like maybe like a minute-long slideshow of images with the opening credits, and then it opens up with a kind of the transition of the last photo into like kind of the real, like, the real life version of it.
The more rundown.
Yeah, the rundown, like kind of, it had like other buildings right next to it. But then it like they faded away, and it was just this rundown, soon to be demolished building. And I think that if they had just maybe done a little bit more in that opening bit, you would have run in there with the sentimental bits.
Yeah, I think they could have worked it in throughout a little bit too, because I knew, the building is important because they tell you. And I didn't even quite understand the physical layout of who was on what floor. Like I would have had to written it down in order to understand where people were exactly.
And one of them was a new resident. It was like, it wasn't even a person that had been there very long.
Right. So, so that was maybe a little.
It was implied that he had given up something like quote unquote like much better to be that building, but you don't quite understand why.
Yeah.
We needed
someone to try and save the building. Like you're still like, I don't get it. I don't know why he cares so much.
Exactly.
And I think it's the same. We're all talking about the same thing, which is there's too much story here for the amount of time that a single film will allow. Like
exactly.
it actually, even though it's not, I don't think it isn't. It feels as though it could have easily been a novel to movie situation, where they have all sorts of hanging threads. It's a little bit better than some of the worst of those, because they do address a lot of that enough that we understand the characters, but there's just so much more. We just get little bits of certain things where it's sort of like a too much to not be important and to just be interest. Like Robert Rodriguez does great things in his movies where he gives these little bit characters just a little spark of interest that makes them fascinating, even if they die 5 minutes later. But he doesn't give you so much that you feel invested, and then you feel kind of like, but what the fuck happened with that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I don't think this one really fails that heavy on that, because it is a long movie, so they do cram. Everybody has some parts in there. But it does feel in off the cases like character studies rather than a full arc for anybody. really.
Right. It's like instead of taking 10 things and doing them all like a little bit, they really should have picked like 3.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
wove them through the story.
Just because we're running out of time, I want to jump back because I got continuations on this point that I want to talk about. So the second thing in that opening, right? Like, so we're giving like kind of this like sentimental feeling to this building. Like we want it to live. Like we want this building to survive. The other thing that they did well was the Knock Knock crew made you want the building to survive just in spite of the villains. Like you're just like, oh, I just don't want this building to get knocked down because of the villains and because of like just absolute like out of the park like great acting. Like that was like brilliantly done. There's so much like gravitas and like care in making of that character like unlikable, but like not so unlikable that you didn't want to see more of him on the screen. But I think the thing that they missed was, in knowing a little bit about dementia, moving a person from one like setting to another is very traumatic for somebody with dementia. You're already confused about people and schedules and like what's going on. Adding like new environments you've never seen before is stressful. And so they never use that as like a plot device to be like, no, we have to stay in this building. Like we have to be here. Like we can't move because it's going to cause Faye more pain, right?
They'd have had to acknowledge the dementia, right? Which nobody seems to do, which is kind of part of the point, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But I mean, I felt like that was like kind of like a low-hanging fruit for like how to kind of drive what they were trying to do. Because like at the end, you know, when this building is rebuilt, you're kind of like, yay. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, like if they had really done a good job of like selling the importance of this building, that moment would have felt really triumphant, and it would have been like, the building is back. You know, tears falling. I'm feeling so happy for all of these people because, you know, this building is back. But really, like, a lot of their problems had kind of been resolved before, before that final moment.
It felt more of like a, like, didn't get their way. Like,
well, and like, I expected, like, I didn't really feel that much that the building was rebuilt. I felt happy for Harry, the maintenance guy, because he was so devastated by the building. Like, clearly that was all he had. And so when they come back and visit him personally while he's the only one there, that's a sweet moment. I do want to touch on one sort of thematic element to this film that we haven't really touched on, which I think is not necessarily obvious unless you're like me and obsess over things, which is the sort of man-made and city and civilized man-made elements as nature in this. Because think about it this way. So you have the building, right? The building is the only thing standing, like a tree trunk. The aliens are very much like birds. They're literally finding a place to make a nest and have the nest, and then they leave. So it's really this case where we've got, and yet it follows into that idea, which I'm sure was in the brain of Brad Bird and the other writers and Mick Garris when he was creating the story, is like, okay, this is definitely a case where we are saying that there is soul, so to speak, in these creations, even though they're not natural or physically alive in the way we understand it. So, and both the building as a tree that everyone lives and thrives off of, the nature that provides, and the robots, which are, as he said, they're cans, you know what I mean? They're metal. They're not what we would see and think that's alive, but they're clearly alive. And so I thought that was an interesting theme to run through. It was sort of a weird, not anti-nature, pro-man stance. Like they're like procreation stance. Like creations are important and have a similar importance to biological life. And that doesn't degrade the importance of natural, and nature. It's really just separate or parallel to it, which I thought was a really interesting thing. Because usually, especially in a movie that has a family movie that is supposed to have a message, quote unquote, normally, it would be Ferngully. Like, expansion's wrong. Mankind is on the wrong path. We destroy everything we touch, and it's evil. This is like, no. This is like life is life, and it's progressing, and we need to respect it as we do everything else. So I thought that was an interesting thing that normally we don't see, like, because expansion is problematic, right, in this film. Yet what they're trying to save is not a tree, you know, in what we would think. So that, but it is kind of a tree. So it's sort of like seeing things differently, you know, seeing life in things that are not living. I thought that was just an interesting
It's a tree in the sense of it's where those people put down roots.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
to further the metaphor.
It sustains tons of life forms, right? I mean, how many things live in a tree? So there's definitely it's definitely a metaphor, and I think that it's easy to miss that. But once you connect the fact that the aliens are birds. I mean, in every sense, like they're birds. I mean, they fix things. I don't know that birds fix anything, but they built a nest. They have their eggs. They raise them to fly. They literally have the flying scene where they're throwing the walking babies down the stairwell because they know that they're going to fly. They're fledglings. And then you have that. So I thought that was fascinating to have this sort of, you know, robotic and life form, you know, biological life paralleled in that way.
Well, actually, so you've just brought me to actually my second point of why I didn't think this movie like worked was there was like two tones, right? Like the little robots and the cutesiness was like for family and like, you know, the whole family get together and like get the kids something that they'd like that, you know, you can also tolerate. But there's so many elements in this that were really heavy in like the overall thing was still light, but like you have dementia, you have, you know, you really deep into like development, and is development like really good? You know, like, is it better to take down this house and build a more efficient structure that'll house more people? And, you know, is this life of this little robot creature that is stillborn, is that life? You know, is that meaningful? You know, there's like that existential bit to it. You know, there's just that unrequited love. You know, the death of a child. There was just so many heavy elements in it. It was like half like a really like intense drama, like with, you know, really serious, hard to talk about issues, and then a cute little robot story. I think the cute little robot story won in the end because it still feels like a kind of a light flick, but it didn't really understand what it was. I think it didn't.
Is that the case, or might it be too that it's hearkening back to an older time of family and children's books? Because now, and I'm one of those people who I have to be really geared up for something sad, and I don't often tread that. That's one of the reasons why I like cult cinema. There can be horrible things that happen in cult cinema, especially my favorite, which is 70s drive-in movies. Yet there seems to, even if it's really realistic, there's at no point in time where we don't know that this is a movie. Whereas other things like really heartbreaking dramas like Shadowlands or something where characters have these intense emotions on screens and they're dealing with things that can affect us in everyday lives, that can be really crushing. Like, especially if I call myself a trauma sponge, right? Like if I get too much around me, I break down on that. So this
Outside of Sand and Fog is that movie for me. I don't know that one, but exactly.
I can't handle that.
Too much.
But in this case, like, look at, like, it's more like a Charlotte's Web, right? Granted, it's still pretty heavy, but like Charlotte's Web opens with a dad going to butcher a piglet.
Yeah.
And it ends with a child learning about death and birth. Like, in the middle, it's adorable and it's fun. But then you have these really heavy elements in it that are sort of the cornerstones of it. I don't think this one is structured exactly that way, but I think that might have been the mindset, is that we can have these heavy elements in this other life. And it still goes along then with the idea that these robot things are birds because they're sort of unaffected by this, right? Like they're symbiotic, but really they're just non-malicious and mildly helpful. And then they're there for a purpose, and then they're going to go.
Yeah, it's very Miyazaki. Like, it's like these characters were very Miyazaki-esque.
That's true.
You know, they're just there. They're not there for you. You know, they're just, you know, relatively benevolent. And so you just happen to, if you put kindness out there, you get a little bit back. It's like, it's really that kind of Miyazaki character-esque. But I mean, I do think that like for example, right? Like normally in this type of film, you have a little kid, right? That is the point of entry for children, but it is also the story element of the innocent view, the naive view of things, right? Is the one that's looking at these creatures and being like, oh, they're just beautiful, like cute little things, where everybody else is like, no, they're robots. Maybe they're military spy bots or whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so this older lady with dementia was kind of that little kid character for us, the one that was viewing this from the kind of the naive and innocent an angle.
Untainted perspective.
Yeah. And I think that I like it now just because, like, I like it, you know, having, you know, gone through that type of stuff, just having a little bit of difference in kind of my thing and not always have the same thing. But I think for kids, I don't think that they had that way into this film, because it was, you know, like, you know, it starts out with kind of like these old timey photos, like what am I watching?
Yeah,
you know, and then
I agree, and I mean that plays maybe, Mandy, to the fact that you're like, I was a 35-year-old 8-year-old, like, you know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where, because I mean it takes a while for the aliens to show up, and like you said, both of you said, the aliens are not the star of the show, really. It's a sort of an intergenerational family drama. But it has really sweet moments. So we're gonna wrap it up, because this movie, there's so many pieces to this movie and so many stories that there's just, which is part of its, I wouldn't say downfall, because I don't think it failed utterly, but I don't think it's as successful as it could have been. Obviously, we wouldn't be talking about it on a Forgotten Films podcast. I think it's just, there's too many elements in here. Then they decided to keep them rather than drive focus towards one or two or three. So we're gonna start off. Mandy, who would you recommend this movie to, and why?
Every 8 going on 35-year-old out there in the world, I see you, you know, you'll enjoy this film. And then also just, I guess, like, people who like those feel-good family movies, maybe you're looking to watch something with your kids that's not so modern. It might have a different storytelling feel to it. Like, go for it. This one's a good one.
Fair enough. Jeff, who would you recommend this movie to, and why?
Watch it with your family. If you got a family, you got kids, watch it with your family. They might not get into it, but, you know, that's the risk, right? They might love it, and you might actually then be able to have some of these conversations about some of the topics that they bring up in the film with them. So I think it's a good. I do think it's still a good family film. I understand why it didn't, like, you know, become the, you know, I'm trying to think of one in that period. It's not the E.T., right? Of the mid '80s or whatever.
Yeah. I think those are fair.
And what's not? Oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking. Johnny Five is alive.
Yeah.
Oh,
Short Circuit.
Yeah, Short Circuit. So it's not the Short Circuit.
Right. And I would even hazard to say Short Circuit might even be a little closer than like E.T., just because it has death in it, right? Like, I mean, there's a little bit of those adult elements working into it, and that's why I think it's interesting to see this movie in those in between years. You know, as an adult, I actually found a lot to talk about in this movie, so I recommend this to adults for sure. But I also recommend it to watch with kids who are maybe preteen or early teens, or you know, early preteens, like that whole range, because they're going to get some of the heartfelt moments, and it's going to affect them. And they may be like me as a kid and hate movies that make me sad, and then as an adult see them and be like, I get it. Like, I knew that I understood it enough to be sad. Now I understand it enough to see the totality of it and its purpose. So I think that's an interesting way to look at it. And that's going to do it for us on this episode of Cult and Classic. Please go ahead and leave reviews on your favorite podcasting platform if you like us. If you don't like us, donate so we can do better at cultandclassicpodcast.com. As always, here is the Chud to play us out. You can visit the Chud at facebook.com/thechudband. And again, visit cultandclassicpodcast.com to find out what's going on with us. Send us an email at cultandclassicpodcast@gmail.com. This has been Nate Wyckoff with Mandy Longley and Jeff Tucker. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit coltonclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.